think we are going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully a couple more folks will trickle in. So thanks for joining us on this late afternoon session. We are very excited to be here with you today and share with you more about CloudAhoy, as well as hopefully introduce some of you to CloudAhoy for the first time. So a little bit in terms of who we are. So I'm here today with Seth Richards. Seth is our principal software engineer. He is a student pilot working on his private license and one of CloudAhoy's most tenured employees. And I am the least tenured employee of CloudAhoy. So I joined at the beginning of the new year. I am their new COO. I have a private license and my instrument rating. And I'm really excited to be a part of this awesome team. So today we're going to take you through what is CloudAhoy, and we're going to dive into some actual debriefs, so VFR flights, IFR flights, debriefing for proficiency, and then some other fun things that we have cooking. And before we dive into that, I want to get a better sense from you all. So who here has actually heard of CloudAhoy before? Okay, great. And who has used CloudAhoy to debrief a flight? Okay, great. So varying level of experience. That's great. All right, so diving right into what is CloudAhoy. So we are an aviation technology company, and we develop data-driven post-flight debriefs that enable pilots and organizations to objectively analyze their flights after landing. Now, our founder, Chuck, if you guys were in the session with Radek earlier, he mentioned their relationship, which goes back, but Chuck developed CloudAhoy with a mission, and that mission was really to improve pilot safety and proficiency, and that mission really rings true to today. We are constantly amazed by the stories we hear from our customers on how they're using CloudAhoy to become safer and more proficient pilots. In that vein, I'd say we're also excited to be part of the modernization of the aviation industry by leveraging data and technology to really bring to bear and learning what we can from those flights after landing. And that drives a lot of efficiency gains. You know, the more efficient debrief you have, the less wear and tear on your aircraft frame, and the more time and money pilots and instructors can save. So a lot of value there to be had from using the software. So in terms of the way it works, so we analyze your flight data, and we know where you are and what you are doing while you're flying. And then we basically give you, the pilot or the organization, the instructor, the tools to visualize and review all of the segments of your flight after landing. So that includes things like maps, graphs, synthetic 3D cockpit view, which you can see here in the upper right hand of the screenshot. And for the pro users, we go even further. So we provide them with an automatic scoring of the overall flight. So you can really precisely fine-tune and hone in on exactly what you could have done better as a pilot. The last thing I'll note before handing it off to Seth to start to demonstrate what the technology is we're really excited by the diverse and growing customer base. So we work with flight schools, we work with independent CFIs, professional and recreational pilots, as well as the flight departments at the US Navy and the Air Force. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Seth to take us through our first demo.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. So as Kate mentioned, I'm Seth. I'm a principal software engineer at CloudAhoy. She called me a student pilot. That's right, but more precisely, I'm a perpetual student pilot. I've done the first 5 or 10 hours of my private pilot training probably 5 or 6 times over the last 25 years. Someday I'll finish it, but until then, coming to places like this is how I get my aviation fix. So what I'd like to do first, the first demo I'd like to show is a VFR training flight. So any flight instructors in the room have probably sat right seat in thousands of flights just like this one. This was probably, I don't know, maybe my 7th or 8th lesson on flying an RV-12 equipped with a Dynon EFIS. And I am taking off from Portsmouth, New Hampshire on the seacoast. We're flying up the coast of Maine, going to do some basic air work and then some touch and goes at Sanford Airport, and then coming back to Portsmouth. Oops. So the first thing that I'll do, I actually opened up the debrief, and this is kind of like patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time, trying to stand over here and control this screen. but we'll see how we do. So this is the main CloudAhoy user interface, and it should be familiar from the screenshots that you saw earlier, and if you're a CloudAhoy user, you've seen this many times. So what I'd like to do is just point out that area there on the left-hand side of the screen. Those are segments that CloudAhoy automatically identified in my flight. So I was flying an aircraft with an EFIS. I was able to put a USB stick in the EFIS, download my flight's data, and provide it to CloudAhoy. That's one of many ways that we can get flight data into CloudAhoy, and in a subsequent slide I'll show even more. Excuse me. CloudAhoy's taken that data and combined it with other aerospace data that we have, and it's automatically determined what I was doing and where I was doing it. And again, we're showing CloudAhoy Pro here, so that section there in the top left-hand side of the screen is showing all of the scores for the maneuvers that CloudAhoy was able to grade for me. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with this flight. My total flight score, and I think this has a laser point. Yeah, but it doesn't show up on the screen. But my total flight score is a 90, and that is an aggregate of all of the individual maneuver scores from this flight. One thing that I've noticed is the color on this monitor is weird. Oh, I guess it looks okay from the front. So there's a lot of green there, which is good. Anything above 80 with our default configuration shows green. But I see a couple maneuvers there, a 360-degree turn and a descent to landing that is yellow. So that's kind of the less than excellent scale. So let's take a look at one of those maneuvers. So I'm going to click right here on the right 360, and you can see that there is a 360 in there somewhere, but there's other 360s laying right on top. And what I'd like to do is just focus on this one. So I'm going to check that checkbox, and that makes it so that is the only one selected. Now you might have noticed that when I clicked on that segment, the map zoomed in, the 3D cockpit view adjusted, and the graph along the bottom also adjusted, so it's only showing that one segment. All three of those views are synchronized in time, so as I change the time of the flight that I'm currently debriefing, all of the windows that I have open will stay synchronized. So we'll first look at the shape. So I've got it's a pretty nice 360-degree turn. Based on the shape of it, where do you think the wind is coming from? What we can do is we'll turn on the wind vectors real quick. And we can see, yes, that wind is coming from the west-northwest. For an in-air maneuver like a 360-degree turn, we're not concerned about wind correction or anything like that. But having a capability like wind vectors is really nice when you're debriefing ground reference maneuvers or approaches and you want to evaluate how you are correcting for wind. The next thing we'll start talking about is the segment info window that we have down here. At the top of this window, we have my overall score for the maneuver, which is a 77. And there are a couple different ways that we can see why I received a 77 for this maneuver. I like to start with the graphs. So we'll go down here, and this is a graph of my altitude during this maneuver. You can see along the bottom here, we have this yellow segment that corresponds to the yellow that we see on the map, and that is the area that is my 360-degree turn. That green line is my altitude during the maneuver. And you might be able to see it, but there's a dashed green line right there, and that is showing me my entry altitude, right? So if we're thinking about the ACS standards, we're looking for plus or minus 100 feet of the entry altitude. That's what this green box right there represents. So as long as I keep my green line inside of that box, I am within the ACS standards. So at a glance, I can look at this graph and see where I broke out of that 100-foot boundary, and it's been highlighted for me here in red. Moving on to the next graph, this is a graph of my indicated airspeed. Again, we have my entry airspeed is that dashed green line. My airspeed throughout the maneuver is the solid green line. And that green box is plus or minus 10 knots. So again, at a very quick glance, I can evaluate my performance based on the ACS, just looking at this graph. you can see there's a lot of red there. So that's where I lost probably a lot of my points for this maneuver. And finally, because I imported EFIS data, and the EFIS data includes accurate pitch, bank, and yaw information, CloudAhoy is also able to evaluate my bank during the maneuver. So again, once the bank has been established, CloudAhoy is looking for me to maintain plus or minus 5 degrees of bank throughout the maneuver. Only a little bit of red there. So, is there an easier way to see all of that? Up here, if I open this area up, we have a score table. So it shows the 4 pieces, the 4 criteria that combined together give me the overall score for this maneuver. So altitude, indicated airspeed, heading, so I'm looking at plus or minus 10 degrees entry and exit heading, and then finally that roll rate. It tells me what my initial was, what my goal is, how I actually performed, and the weight that that particular criteria contributes to the overall score for this maneuver. One thing to note is by default, we ship with the ACS standards encoded into our envelope, but that is configurable. So you can configure your own parameters for that. Maybe if you're prepping for your check ride, you want to be plus or minus 50 feet. So you can set up your envelope to evaluate you using those criteria rather than the standard ACS criteria. So again, like we saw in the graph, we have the color coding here, and I did lose a bunch of points because my altitude, I got up to plus 108, but the most significant impact was my indicated airspeed. I got a 24. Instead of being plus or minus 10, I was plus 0 to plus 22. Not my finest hour. The next thing we'll do is look at this approach to runway 25. So I'm going to uncheck this, and we'll click on the descent to runway 25. And again, all of the views update, including the segment info at the bottom. I'll check this checkbox so that we can see that approach. And I'm just going to switch from the VFR chart to satellite imagery. And again, I've left my wind vectors on so we can see what the wind is doing there as I'm landing. Instead of going through the graphs, we'll just look at the table this time. Again, I got a 78. The most significant portion that I did not perform well, my sink rate was not within bounds. So we're looking for a sink rate of 800 to 300 feet per minute. I descended 1,300 feet per minute at one point in time, so I was going down pretty quickly. And actually, I'll switch this into a 3D track view. And you can see this dip here. Right in there is where I was descending pretty rapidly, pretty close to the ground. So again, not great. And then a couple other criteria related. Descent angle is consistent. So I'm not being, because this is a VFR approach, I'm not being evaluated on maintaining a specific 3-degree or 3.5-degree glide slope. But what CloudAhoy is looking for is a consistent angle of descent. And what that is telling me is that my angle of descent was very inconsistent, which is not stable and probably not safe. And reviewing this now, I think I probably should have gone around. I happen to remember flying into Sanford this day. There was glider activity off the side of the runway, and I was totally distracted. And I should have gone around here. Go ahead.
Why does CloudAhoy not look at a 3D like that?
What's that?
What does it look? It's looking for a BVI, and not a 3D like that.
So we're evaluating stability because this is a VFR approach. So as long as I'm stable, I'm not looking to be on a particular glide slope. For instrument approaches.
So are we looking at stabilized approach FAA definition or stabilized approach CloudAhoy definition?
And probably a mix of both.
It's simple. I mean, a stabilized approach is your altitude, your airspeed. Things aren't changing. Once you get stabilized, if you have a good sight picture,
if
you end up where you want to be.
But by the same token, here's my thought about that. If I'm shooting, so now I start to train an instrument student.
Yep.
So they do a circle of land.
Sure.
When they show up on final, what kind of glide path do I want them to have? 3 degrees.
Sure. And for an
Why
instrument,
would I not train my private pilot student day one,
sure.
learn what a 3-degree glide path looks like? So when they go fly one out of a circling approach, they know what a 3-degree glide path knows because they've learned it day one. So,
yep.
And we have to have stabilized, supposed to have stabilized approaches with both VFR and IFR
yep.
Approaches. While it's a little bit harder to do that with a VFR approach, because you're not sitting out here 4 miles on the final.
Sure.
You still have all the trigger points to be able to figure out the 3-degree glide path by being approximately 500 feet on base, rolling on a final, 300 feet, 1 nautical mile, that kind of thing, or that. So, can I change that to 3-degree glide path?
Not currently. So we can't. So for a VFR approach, again, CloudAhoy is just looking for a consistent end. It's up to the instructor to teach the student how he or she wants to teach the student.
So we're indirectly getting at that with the VFR debriefs, and we directly get at that with the instrument debriefs,
right.
But it's through sync rate, feet per minute, those types
Right,
of.
so I just got to remember when I'm debriefing, I have to establish the 3-degree glide path for the eyeballs of the student, and then they have to maintain the stability associated with that 3-degree glide path in terms of vertical speed.
Sure. Yep. Let's talk afterwards because there's another way we could do it that's a little bit different, but I don't want to get too far.
Some of the VFR things you're doing display special, you're doing weight surveillance training, you do a lot of different things VFR where you want a much deeper and normal approach.
Right, that's right.
And that was some of the feedback that we got.
Exactly.
We actually have made recent adjustments to how we evaluate these VFR approaches because of short field, soft field, obstructions, those sorts of things, because we were dinging people when we shouldn't have been. Because they were intentionally landing halfway down the runway because they were trying to make the last taxiway, right? If we evaluated that the same way we evaluated an IFR approach, we're skewing the scores way lower than they should be. Excellent question, though.
But I think that plays to the importance, I think, of the instructor in that conversation to really interpret. Like CloudAhoy gives you the what, it gives you what the data provides from your actual flight, but the instructor is an important part of that. In terms of the why, why that happened. And so, very much to sit alongside the instructor is how we envision this product. But at the same time, I myself, currently training for commercial, but as a private pilot, I also have value in using it. I just don't necessarily always have that instructor sitting next to me, so.
Excellent. And so those are the basics of debriefing some VFR maneuvers, including a VFR approach. And so with that, you get back to it. Oh no, wait, this is my slide.
Cover how it works and then I'll do it.
I know, right. So I mentioned that with my VFR flight, I imported my data from the Dynon EFIS. That's not the only way to get data into CloudAhoy, data about your flight. So the most common way that we see is people use the iOS or Android app that CloudAhoy has. Basically, before you start flying, you press the start button in the CloudAhoy app and you put your phone somewhere where it can get good GPS reception throughout the course of your flight. It uses the internal GPS in the device to capture the location and altitude, and then that data gets uploaded to our cloud automatically when you land. Another source of data is electronic flight bags. So if you're flying, for instance, with ForeFlight and you have track log recording turned on, we can import those track logs directly. And kind of a footnote there is that if you're using Stratus with ForeFlight, when you import the data from ForeFlight, we also get pitch and bank information from the Stratus. We don't currently have pitch and bank information if you're recording with the CloudAhoy app. And then finally, we can get what we call rich data from aircraft avionics and flight simulators. So that rich data includes engine RPM, it includes, in some cases, flapping gear status, exhaust gas temperatures. Even from the G1000, we get comm frequencies, so you can see when the radio frequencies change during the course of the flight, which is kind of neat. So we get that data from your flight, And then we combine that data with a bunch of aviation-related databases that we have access to. That includes aerodrome information for airports around the world. FAA publishes approaches in electronic format that we import into CloudAhoy, and we can actually graphically represent the published FAA approach on your debrief, and Kate's going to show an example of that in a minute or two. For worldwide or international customers, we also have a way that we can define instrument approaches. So not every country is like the United States that publishes their aviation data freely. But if you're regularly flying into an airport and you have an approach plate that you can send us, we can build the electronic representation of that approach that we can display in CloudAhoy. We also get wind information. So some folks might be wondering if we're just using the GPS to derive speed, how can we present indicated airspeed in our debriefs? And the answer to that is we will estimate the indicated airspeed based on your ground speed and the current wind conditions that we get from the local airport METARs and winds alarms. If you're flying with the G1000, G1000 dumps the actual wind data out to us, so we use that in the debrief instead. We combine all that together and put it through our analyzer. And the special sauce that comes out the backside is our automatic segmentation, scoring, and visualization. So that, in a 3-minute spiel, is how we're able to generate these debriefs using that data.
That upper right window would give you the simulated visual of like a landing. If you were doing it, you could watch it.
Absolutely right.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. You don't need anything extra. It does Google Earth through your program directly. You don't have to do anything.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yep, map to satellite terrain.
And now Kate will show us debriefing and instrument approach.
Yep, so debriefing and instrument approach. I'll walk you through how CloudAhoy helped me hone in on something really specific and actionable to focus on for my next instrument flight. It identified a particular issue and really allowed me to understand what I could do better. So in terms of context, I'm based out of the Concord Airport in New Hampshire. I was flying instrument practice approaches with my flying buddy as a safety pilot. I was flying with Stratus GPS in the aircraft, a Cessna 182. And I uploaded the flight track through Flight. So this is very standard practice for me. I don't have rich data in the aircraft, but Stratus does a pretty darn good job uploaded through the track log through Flight. So we've found a lot of our customers do that. So I'm going to talk you through one of the approaches I flew to. So I'll walk you through how I debrief pretty quickly the Manchester ILS 35. All right, so in terms of orientation, I know the screen is a little hard to see there, so I will talk you through what I'm clicking. So first here on the left-hand side, I see my 3D track of the flight. And I mentioned I'm going to debrief one of the approaches. So these two yellow sections, again, tied to, as Seth mentioned, the scores. I'm going to debrief the ILS 35 because that's kind of hard to see, but that's where I got a 76, which was my lower score. So I'll go here and I'll click on that, and as Seth mentioned, all the windows are synchronized, so that brings my aircraft in a sort of 3D mode onto that track. Now, what I really care about is just that ILS approach. So I'm going to go ahead and click declutter, and it's going to pull my plane specifically onto that approach. And this goes back to your original question, so you can actually come in and map that ILS 35. So here I can zoom in here and I can see my aircraft along that flight path. So a really useful tool there. So I can zoom in and you'll see there's an initial fix. At the time I was actually vectored by ATC. You can see how I'm coming into the final approach fix. So just looking at that pink line of perfection mapped to my flight path, I can already start to see why my score was lower. But if I come over here to the upper right-hand side, now CloudAhoy is really telling me what I could have done better. So again, this is hard to see, so I'll talk you through it. Most of it's green, which is great, but there is one piece there, and that piece is an important piece of the flight. What that says is the ILS glide slope, and I have a 5, that's the red area. The goal, and CloudAhoy is a pretty tough grader in regards to instrument approaches, is less than or equal to 1 dot. So for the instrument pilots in the room, that's a pretty stabilized approach. And my actual here, CloudAhoy tells me on my flight I was between 0.7 and 1.8 dots, and that was weighted 21%. Obviously, that's a big indicator of stability when you're flying an instrument approach. So that is what pulled my score down. And I can actually scroll down here and look at some of that data. So because I see that red on the ILS glide slope, one of the great things about ILS approaches that CloudAhoy provides is a graph of the vertical CDI. So as Seth was walking you all through earlier, that red area that you see here, those are areas for improvement. So I can go ahead and put my cursor here, and my aircraft here, my aircraft avatar is mapped just to that part, and I'm going to go ahead and play the flight. And you can play it at different speeds, so this is at 1x. And down here, if you see, in that 3D cockpit view, that glide slope indicator is telling me to go down, go down, go down. It should be here, right? And I'm, for whatever reason, not focusing on that. Perhaps there were other things going on in the cockpit. So that is how I debrief the IFR approach. And then just to show a little bit more of the capability, again, this is not everything that CloudAhoy can do, but you can also put the layout to be the IFR chart, similar to the sectional view. So I will go ahead and pause that and hand it back over to Seth.
So an IFR, when it's scoring after the final approach fix at a point where you're staying, because if you got vectored beforehand, you might be, kind of coming in from different angles.
Yeah, and that's what it did in that case from the final approach fix is where it scored.
Cool. So the next thing we're going to talk about is debriefing for proficiency. And we put this slide deck together without knowing what all of the other presentations here were going to be about, and it seems like proficiency is a really hot topic, which is totally awesome, because that's right in our wheelhouse. So everybody's familiar with the difference between currency and proficiency, right? You go to your logbook generally to see if you're current. Do you have the right number of night landings before you carry a passenger? Do you have the correct number of instrument approaches in the last 90 days? When was your last flight review? Proficiency, and that will tell you whether or not you are legal to get in your airplane and go fly. It won't tell you whether or not that is the safe thing to do. Maybe it's been 90 days since you've touched an airplane. I don't know that I'd want to load my family up in an airplane and take a cross-country flight if I hadn't been maintaining my proficiency. So the proficiency is, am I safe? And you evaluate those sorts of things by asking the questions that we've been asking throughout the course of this presentation. How stable was that approach? Did I maintain my altitude correctly? What was the entry and exit headings on my steep turn if you're evaluating your proficiency before a check ride, for instance? With proficiency and safety as your goal, it really makes sense to debrief after every flight, right? You're always going to notice something new and find that there's something more to learn. Over time, you can start to see trends, repeated mistakes, and bad habits. And this is an example provided to us by a friend of CloudAhoy. Young lady went flying out on the West Coast, and she made a mental note on the last landing of the day that she wasn't maintaining center line very well on her final approach. So she went and verified that in the CloudAhoy debrief and saw that she scored a 56 on that center line maintenance during final. She then went back and looked at the approaches previous to that one and saw that every approach in the flight had a less than excellent centerline maintenance score. She then went back even further and checked previous flights and saw that it is a trend that she hadn't noticed until this day that she went flying. So she put that on the list of things that she is keeping track of to talk with her flight instructor for during her next flight review. So she's going to bring this information, the knowledge that she needs help in this area or would like help in this area, which is going to her instructor for maybe root cause analysis. Is there a reason why I'm always off center? Are there mitigation techniques I can use to improve this? And actually, Daniel Baker kind of foreshadowed a little bit of where CloudAhoy sees itself going in the future. So the friend of CloudAhoy had to manually go back and look at flights to look for trends. And Daniel Baker this morning mentioned that CloudAhoy is moving into the FOCA space and doing analysis on larger groups of flights. So at some point in the future, we hope to have the ability to let pilots look at their flights in aggregate and have CloudAhoy automatically show them where are the things that you might want to focus on. And another thing, we went to Josh Harnagel's presentation this morning about Redbird Pro, and he talked about, in terms of proficiency, people like to practice the stuff they're good at, right? We hope that CloudAhoy will help reinforce the good habits and behaviors and help point out the places there where you should be practicing, either on your own or with the help of a CFI. Yes?
Is the position information good enough to give you data on like centerline alignment after touchdown?
Yes.
Like that's fine also.
Yep. It is.
Very precisely. I'm not sure if you were in the presentation that Radek gave, but he was also talking about CloudAhoy. And it's like, I was amazed, 3 feet off the center line, and CloudAhoy could tell me. And it was not staged.
My wife always tells me if I'm not on the center line.
There you go. So, up to the foot.
Using CloudAhoy with a phone, say you want to make sure your phone is mounted somewhere so it's not just in your pocket kind of thing.
Yeah, so the key there, if you're using the GPS devices that they put in iPhones aren't the greatest. So the key there is having your phone in a place where it will maintain good sky visibility so it will be able to communicate with the GPS satellites.
So do you find like a flight training school? I'm going to play a small flight school actually in Southbridge, Massachusetts. And I've got an old Stratus device, but you find the Stratus devices and things like that, particularly with the bank and pitch, that's a better way to debrief things, particularly if you're going to try to integrate it in a student debrief thing.
For a couple different reasons. Normally you're mounting the Stratus somewhere and it's staying there and it's not moving, which is good. And they use a better quality GPS.
And will that work with like a Stent, or you'd recommend the bigger Stratus, the better Stratuses?
My recollection, I'll have to go back and double check, but my recollection is we're only working with the Stratus at the moment. I don't think we support the Sentry. Okay. Yeah, but I can look into that.
I had a nice plane that I sold that had the Stratus built in with the transponder. That was great. I love that setup. But
I mean, if you think about it, if you want precision and real accuracy, like the phone in your pocket is going to be the least precise results versus the Garmin 1000, which would be extremely precise across all the gauges. So there's a spectrum, and we work with what we can work with, but the specificity varies.
If it works for the Garmin 345, that does the EDSB out.
If it provides results with a phone in your pocket, though, anything better than that, better outcomes. So that's a good rule of thumb.
It's interesting. It's really nice to see how the data driven with I think you mentioned the instructor's eyes and what you're trying to do is the important thing, but it gives you an extra level of things that the student has from. Or for a good pilot, you really get better, check right prep, things like that. Doing because my students fly better iPhone than I do because I don't fly that much. I'm telling them what to do. When I go in the simulator, I suck, and it's like I know what to do, but I just don't do it enough on my own.
Yeah, and it's like when I was getting my instrument back in November of 2020, I would sit down with my instructor for 10 minutes after the flight, and we'd try to remember what was happening in that busy cockpit at the time. And I didn't even know about CloudAhoy at that point, and I wish I had, because I would have saved a lot of time, money, and learned a whole lot faster had I been using this as a tool in addition to those conversations with my instructor. So it's our hope that every single pilot will use this and see the benefits to their flying. Go ahead.
For Valley, we have something like the Stratus. Is it working for Valley?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have the answer to that.
So working for
Aerobatics. So you're actually, we are doing aerobatics with the military, not something we mentioned, but way to open the door.
We don't have a commercially available product that we can sell you today that supports aerobatics, but we have been working with the military, and part of the initial military pilot training is a lot of aerobatics. So we've put some stuff together for them, and I'll show you a visualization later. We're also helping them debrief their formation flights. So we can actually debrief formation out of the way as well.
You guys are hitting on all the cool stuff that we were going to unveil at the end.
You've been waiting.
I have a question. Okay, so
from a university standpoint, talk about validity and reliability. So you are getting, it is a valid program and you are getting reliability.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one of the issues I always had is there are good instructors and bad instructors.
Yep.
Is there a way to judge instructors in that, you know, when they go out, because we use the Jefferson syllabus, and so, you know, one instructor would grade a maneuver out of 3, another one would grade a maneuver, you know, maybe more stringent, graded at a 5 or something like that. Student comes back and says, you know, I thought I was doing well, and I flew with this guy, and blah, blah, blah. So is there a component there that I can look at? I guess it'd be data mining. So.
It really would. So we don't have anything off the shelf right now for doing stuff like that. But you're not unique in that concern. That was another thing that we worked with the Air Force on.
Right.
Even though they're using CloudAhoy, their IPs were filling out grade sheets every time. But the squadron commander would occasionally spot check the IP's grade sheets against the CloudAhoy grade. Now there was no administrative action or anything like that taken, but just to kind of pressure check what the instructors are doing versus, there's no variation in how CloudAhoy grades.
I think on another level, as administrator working with a lot of CFIs, I think training CFIs, you know, how to grade would be fantastic.
Yeah, get everyone to align on that envelope that you're evaluating the criteria against, and there's your objective data for every single flight, regardless of the CFIs.
One other question.
Sure.
Kind of late to the game on this. How long have y'all been out there, and what's the
Great question.
Yes. So I've been with CloudAhoy for almost 6 years now. So it started as a passion project. Chuck, the founder, retired and started taking flight lessons. But he realized he was carrying an iPhone around in his pocket every time he flew, so he started playing with this, and for a long time it was available just as a free product.
So if I went back to my university and queried my instructors, would they know about this, or?
There's a good chance.
Okay.
Yep.
There's a good chance. I think we're known in the aviation industry. I will say, we have never heavily invested in a lot of marketing or promotion, so a lot of people have found CloudAhoy.
You're contacting the wrong people.
Yeah, you found.
Well,
as someone that's above 25 flight instructors and their little issues, I've never heard of this. So
that's actually good to hear. Well, not good to hear, but good feedback to receive.
And we want to do more of that. That's going to be a big push for us this year.
Sure.
Good.
I'll give you 2.
That's great. Go ahead.
I had a question about this. We operate all the same aircraft, U1000.
Okay, great.
What we do is every 100 hours we pull data, all the airplanes, just in case we have maintenance. Sure. Go back and look. Does CloudAhoy allow a mass amount of data to track trends, whether that being prohibited airports that maybe someone had gone to, that we could upload that data every 100 hours and go, okay, it was snowing they were supposed to, or we're seeing that the average fuel burn is 9 gallons an hour when we should be running that rich. Stuff like that, can we see trends with mass data in CloudAhoy?
So not today. But that is
we're actively working on.
Yes, that is the direction that we're going. Specifically, we're working with folks like Embry-Riddle and Purdue and the Citation Jet Pilots Association that I think it was the gentleman from Cirrus that was talking about this morning or this afternoon.
Working with Charlie on that.
Yeah, so that is where we're spending a lot of our time and focus now. Because we have this debrief for the individual pilot and the pilot and instructor, right? But that next level is, what are the trends? Are folks going to prohibited airports? And specifically for the G1000, I forgot to mention earlier that we do work with a company called AirSync, and they provide a device that plugs into the SD card slot of that G1000, and it automatically uploads the flight data from the G1000 to AirSync server. And we have an integration with them so that data can then get pushed immediately to CloudAhoy. And that, I believe, is what Purdue is doing right now. So there's AirSync, yep.
So after each flight's automatically getting sent?
It's automatically getting sent.
So you land and there's an email in your inbox giving you the highlights from your flight. And what you're asking for is that aggregated data, and that is actively in the works. That's sort of where we're naturally headed next.
Yep.
The USB slot you're using on the T1000 is which one?
I can pull up the cloud. I think it's the top one.
Top right?
I don't know.
We can follow.
Yeah, we can find out.
We'll be able to answer that.
That's a hardware problem. I'm a software guy. Yeah.
Just a quick word on Redbird.
Yeah, so what we were going to do, just we're running low on time, and we realized that we are the last two people standing between you and beer. So we won't make this go any longer than it has to. But we were talking about proficiency, and one of the things that's great about Redbird is that you can practice things that you wouldn't normally practice in a real airplane, including the quote-unquote impossible term, right? So we have a couple of flights. There was a scenario that was flown at the PPC. We'll just show it real quick. I won't go all the way through it. But basically, this is the sort of thing that you might practice for proficiency. The idea behind this was that the student pilot would fly, or the participating pilot would fly 4 traffic patterns. The first 3, the instructor would kill the engine at some point. There would be an engine failure. In the last one, there would be no engine failure. The participating pilot would be sitting there waiting for it to happen the entire time. And that's kind of that feeling of being prepared for that sort of thing to happen. And again, it's a proficiency exercise, not something you would probably practice, at least at low level, in your aircraft. But it's a great way to use the Redbird. And we also, similar to how I was describing that integration with AirSync, we have a direct integration with Redbird. So if you have an account with Redbird through Redbird Navigator and you plug in your USB key, Kate actually has one hanging around her neck, and I've seen a couple other folks that I think have them from the PPC, that uniquely identifies you with a Redbird. The Redbird will automatically upload your flight to Redbird, and then Redbird will send it to us, and it will show up immediately in your CloudAhoy account for Debrief.
So in our last minute, Seth, do you want to play the formation?
Sure, yeah.
Just a couple of other things to note. We offer a 35-day free trial of Pro that works out to be $65 a year. It works out to be a little bit more than a Starbucks latte a month, so very much worth it. The Pro subscription is $150 a year. We also have a tool for flight school, so organizations to centrally manage as admins multiple subscriptions. So if you own a flight school and you have multiple pilots or aircraft, we make that very straightforward to navigate. And in terms of just innovation and partnership with the military, we sort of alluded to it earlier, but we're doing really fun, innovative work in partnership with the military in terms of formation flying and aerobatics. Those aren't, products available for retail consumption just yet, but a lot of really interesting work, and I know Seth's been a lot more involved in that than I have.
It's been a lot of fun. And these flights actually were flown in 2 virtual reality simulators by 2 Air Force student pilots, which is just totally fascinating. If you've never flown a VR sim, you got to try it. It's pretty sweet.
Are they in P6s?
Yes, they are. Yep.
Yeah, so I feel like we've only, as a company, really just scratched the surface, and we're excited this year to really share more about what CloudAhoy is all about. So. Any other last questions before we wrap up for drinks? Go ahead.
I think you could do it on a phone, like a debrief, but do you find that in a flight school environment, going to like a computer screen with a good monitor and doing it like this is better? And with a particular computer speed, you need to be able to watch the virtual image.
So I'll just say I often debrief on my iPad, and I think it works great.
Okay.
I think it just depends. I mean, the user interface is slightly different, but it looks pretty
similar. Okay, but that means I'm trying to vote out multiple people have multiple debriefs on iPad or something like that.
I mean, you can do it on your iPhone too, but bigger screen, you can obviously see things.
For me, I would say the iPad's about the minimum size for a good debrief. Try to do it on an iPhone.
Yeah. I mean,
it loses a lot. For me, the iPad's about the smallest format.
And the touch interface on the iPad is great. That's the easiest way to manipulate those 3D views. Using pinch and zoom, and that's the most natural thing. And then just one more last little bit of fun while we're still sitting here. This is actually my first solo. I recorded all of my flights with a GoPro video camera and CloudAhoy, and this is how I found CloudAhoy. CloudAhoy has the ability to embed a YouTube video in the debrief, synchronized in time, just like all of the other windows. So if you record your flights or you have students that like to record with GoPro, they can synchronize that directly with the CloudAhoy debrief, and it plays and pauses and jumps to the point in the video. I have a flight that I couldn't find for this this conference, but I also used a 3D, a 360-degree camera, and you can manipulate it and look all around, and it's pretty sweet.
Do you have to sync it, or does the software do it?
There is a one-time sync process for each flight. Basically what you do is what I do is for the initial takeoff, I look where I'm crossing the runway threshold line, and I set the debrief to that point. So I put the little aircraft's icon right on the line, and then I advance the video until the video is showing the airplane in the same place, and then that tells CloudAhoy, this is the same time, keep this in sync now.
If you're doing something with a student in a flight and you're like, oh, I want to go back and point that out later, do you have an ability to mark something on the app in the flight?
Yes. Yep. There's an in-flight tab there where you can mark the beginning and end of custom segments and that sort of thing and take notes. Yep.
Developed from feedback from an instructor.
Yep. Yep.
Now, do you need an account to view this? Like, suppose we had CloudAhoy, but I want to debrief remotely. Like, say today we had a lesson, the student goes home, can I put up on a screen, right, other than Zoom? Can they see it, or do they have to have their own account to be able to see
So, if it's in your account, and I can't show you now because I'm actually viewing a shared flight, so you can create a shared link that you can send to the student.
You can both access it.
Yeah.
So they're accessing my accounts as the flight's okay, because this way there could be times when you, maybe something shows up in the CloudAhoy brief and you want to talk about corrective action, and you want to do that later, and well, that's great.
Share links and both access the same.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Kind of like Google Photos. Okay. Thank you all so much.
Awesome.
for your
Thank
time.
you. Great question.